The city of New York is seeking a contract for 14,000 additional hotel rooms to house migrants through next year. The city is already leasing more than 15,000 rooms in more than 150 hotels across the city. The comptroller's office.
So, 14,000 new hotel rooms. That means our leaders expect the asylum crisis to continue for quite a while. Because although adults are evicted from shelter after 30 days and families after 60 days, thousands of new arrivals still come here from the border every month, and New York wants to make sure they've got a place to stay. And what that means is if anyone thought this crisis was ending soon, they're wrong.
New York City planning to continue using pricey Manhattan hotel rooms to house some of the city's 200,000 plus migrants. A new contract would make 14,000 rooms available, costing taxpayers over $300 each per day.
With the arrival of more than 200,000 migrants to the Big Apple, the city is already leasing more than 15,000 rooms in more than 150 hotels across the city.
Definitely both a humanitarian crisis for the migrants that are arriving, and it is creating a fiscal crisis for the city.
I don't see an ending to this. This issue will destroy New York City.
Roughly 135 out of the 680 hotels scattered across the city's 5 boroughs entered the immigration program that allows migrants to be housed in hotels. Now that means fewer beds are available for tourists.
Here's what the New York City Department of Social Services says. While this is a new competitive solicitation, it will simply replace an existing emergency contract to continue to provide safe housing for newly arrived families as they work toward independence. Are those individuals who can't speak the language, have no roots here, are they independent now?
So it turns out renting your hotel to the city is essentially a get-rich-quick scheme if it becomes a shelter. But what nobody's talking about is that this doesn't benefit anybody except the owners of these hotels, because in many cases, the people who move into them end up moving out in worse shape than when they arrived. Because although New York City provides generous temporary housing, that generosity ends within 60 days, forcing people who have nowhere else to go to pack their bags and find one. Which is a problem because 1 or 2 months might be enough time to get off a bus, unpack your things, and fill out asylum-related paperwork, but judging from the growing numbers of tent encampments being built outside of our shelters by people who aren't allowed back in, it doesn't look like folks have had enough time to get the jobs they're gonna need to earn money and live on their own. And what that means is we don't have a shelter system in this city. Instead, we have a revolving door human recycling program where the people who are getting kicked out of shelters are just being replaced by new people who walk in, all while funneling money to people who can already afford to own their own hotel. And what's crazy is these hotels, when the city rents them, they earn more money as shelters than they ever would have made housing tourists and travelers, which was revealed in a study by Bloomberg showing that New York City pays 70% more than market rate when it leases a hotel for use as a shelter. But it gets even worse because security in these places, it's a little light, and dangerous gang members have been sneaking into places like this, masquerading as legitimate asylum seekers, bringing weapons inside places that are designed to keep people safe. And for months, we've been hearing reports of rising violence in some facilities, which puts the futures of many asylum seekers in doubt when they've already fled poverty, leading many to wonder how beneficial these asylum shelters are for the very people they're named after. But although it sounds like New York City is doubling down on a program that's not really benefiting the people it's supposed to benefit, the real reason we have to do this is because it's illegal not to. Because New York City has a right to shelter mandate, a mandate which requires that the city provide housing on a temporary basis to anyone who asks. But 14,000 new hotel rooms, that's a big number, and it makes it look like our leaders anticipate this crisis to continue for at least another year, if not longer, because thousands of people still arrive here every single month and are moved into shelters by immigration advocates promising them they'll get their shot at the American dream, which, as you're about to see, isn't a dream at all. In fact, it's more of a nightmare, unless, of course, you own the hotel people are living in. So this sign refers to this facility as a HERC. That's a Humanitarian Emergency Relief Center. And that is the name that the city uses for its shelters. This is one of them. It's the Watson Hotel. It used to be a Holiday Inn, but went independent a few years ago. And this is the type of facility that the city is going to be looking to rent out in the coming year. And when you consider that a massive building like this holds anywhere between 800 to 1,000 rooms, we're looking at about 14 hotels or 15 hotels rent it out completely.
The city of New York is seeking a contract for 14,000 additional hotel rooms to house migrants through next year. With the arrival of more than 200,000 migrants to the Big Apple since the spring of 2022, the city is already leasing more than 15,000 rooms in more than 150 hotels across the city. The comptroller's office.
Now, of course, this is going to be extremely controversial, not only because these hotel rooms are incredibly expensive, but because they are only for asylum seekers. Now, New York does have a shelter program for regular New Yorkers who've lived here for a while and aren't a new arrival. But the real controversy here isn't that. Instead, it's how much money facilities like this are going to generate for their owners with seemingly no end in sight. Because, as you'll soon see, New York's right to shelter policies, they do keep families and individuals from having to live on the street, but they don't necessarily equip those individuals to live on their own. But we're talking about a lot of money here. Apparently, the city says the hotel rooms are going to cost them around $160 a night, a number that is disputed because independent studies have come up with much higher figures. Either way, the daily cost of housing an asylum seeker doesn't just include the hotel, it also includes all the supplies that they're going to need, all the food, etc., and that comes out to around $352 per day per person. Not that a human life isn't worth infinitely more than that, of course it is, but there are critics who wonder if this is possible to do, to house people like this in expensive facilities like this hotel behind me without cost to the city in general, not just the physical cost of renting the place out, but think about the impact on tourism. That's a massive industry here, and if there are less hotels available for tourists, perhaps that industry will suffer. There are some who say that that will cost us tourist-related jobs. But as you can see from this article, the city's earning a lot of money from tourism, and there are other issues like crime that have a bigger impact on that. And in the city's defense, a lot of the hotels that it does end up renting, like the Roosevelt Hotel, which is now the welcome center for all asylum seekers in the city, this place was bankrupt. It wasn't serving customers. It wasn't open. So it's not a hotel that's been removed from the market. Yes, some hotels are, but many of them, like the Roosevelt and the Row Hotel, are not. Those were both out of business. But some people still don't agree with the idea that housing people in hotels in New York City itself, Manhattan specifically, is the right way to do this or the cheapest way to do this.
You know, we've been talking about this now for 2 years, and it's almost like we're pressing the reset button. Once again, now we need more. What does that mean? We got 150 right now, New York City hotels. The cost is $2.3 billion. No, it's closer to $5 billion.
So this is one of New York City's few city council members who just so happens to be a Republican, and she's making the case that going out and getting all of these hotel rooms, we're doing it because we don't have enough. But that word enough gets thrown around a lot. At what point will we have enough for the asylum seekers that are in our care? And her contention is that although we're doing so much for new arrivals in the city, including things like prepaid debit cards to help with nutrition, here we've got these very generous programs that do so much, but they'll never do enough to get people jobs, because these are just buildings that people live in and then move out of while the owners get paid. They're not designed to give people the skills they need to integrate with our economy and survive by themselves. And that reveals that this entire humanitarian operation, which is based on supposed generosity, isn't generous to anybody except the people who get paid to engage in it. And in order for shelter to be enough, it needs to be based on some sort of goal that the shelter itself is going to help people achieve. But our shelters aren't helping people achieve anything. They're moving out after they move in, and now you've got people living in tents outside of certain shelters in town down by the river. That's the worst fate that anyone could possibly ask for, making you wonder what type of goal was accomplished by moving them into these shelters in the first place. Did it just make a bunch of people feel good about themselves? Did it get somebody paid? Because that's all I can think of. But sadly, the controversy doesn't end there.
There's no end in sight. 14,000 more hotel rooms. That means they're going to branch out now more so into the outer boroughs, quite possibly to more independent hotel owners, making them millionaires who are struggling, making them millionaires overnight.
Yeah, people are getting rich off of that.
So apparently, if you want to be a millionaire, the city will make you one. All you've got to do is own a hotel and rent it out to them to be used as a shelter, housing people temporarily without actually benefiting them. It's terrible. And it's also not the fault of the asylum seekers at all that these shelters are not working out in their benefit. After all, what does the shelter offer except a place to stay for a set period of time? Nothing else. And to many, it's not fair to blame the people who are in a shelter for not being able to move out of it when shelters are supposed to be part of a bigger program, which these aren't. But there is actually another process at play here that might be bigger than the shelter system, and that is the whole asylum paperwork process. Because that program governs the choices people have to make after they move into a shelter. For example, if you check into a place like this, you fill out your asylum paperwork, that correspondence happens by mail. You've got to be able to come back here and get your mail to check on the process of your application. If you don't do that, you could end up getting denied if there's a problem. If the government requests more information, you could miss an important court date. And that's why you see people in tents living near shelters that they've been kicked out of. They have a reason to go back to that facility long after they're not allowed to live there anymore. But this is strange because many of our elected leaders told us for years that New York City's asylum crisis was the solution to its employment crisis. And we were told that the shelter system was appropriate and was going to be able to help people because we had such a job market that was just ready to hire people, that after people moved into a shelter, they were going to immediately be able to get jobs and get plugged in all on their own. But that hasn't been happening. A lot of the jobs that people are taking, they end up being delivery jobs, maybe jobs in construction. These are all positions at, unfortunately, the bottom of the city's economic ladder. A delivery job isn't going to allow somebody to live across the street from a shelter that they used to live in Midtown Manhattan here and afford the rent. Yet they've got to keep coming back here to get their paperwork and to find out what's happening with their asylum claim. Yet for some reason, we as a city still think spending billions in contracts for hotels just like this one is a good way to help people who don't have very much. Yet this entire asylum industrial complex has failed. We can see that it's failing, yet for some reason, our leaders still want to hold on to it. Why is that? So many of our elected officials, they're in favor of continuing the city's right to shelter rules. And that must mean that what they think is that even though things are not perfect and that even though an expensive hotel room doesn't guarantee somebody a job, there will be some people who come here with nothing and pursue the American dream and are able to achieve it in spite of many obstacles. And these are folks who fled extreme poverty. Even if they're living here and things aren't what we might consider to be perfect, perhaps this is still a better, safer life for families and their children. But critics say the opposite is actually true. Things aren't any better necessarily for some of the folks that have come here and fled a whole lot, because a lot of the things that they fled are now following them to New York City.
They're driving around on these motor scooters and these motorized things, and they're doing delivery services in that. That's not the road. That's not the road to getting better or to making them advance in our society. We got kids.
So this program, yes, it does keep people from having to live out here on the streets, but are we really able to say that that makes it successful when a lot of people end up getting moved out and end up who knows where? But there's another massive problem with our shelter apparatus and the poverty that people may find themselves in after they leave that nobody's talking about. And the reason that's a problem is because according to the internet, poverty is a major contributing factor towards crime. And even though most asylum seekers did not come here to commit crime or join gangs, if we're creating a system that leaves them or traps them in poverty, according to this, some people may look at crime as a way out. And with gangs now operating freely in New York City and in other parts of the country, that kind of gives them what they need to recruit new members. They can say, hey, come with us, and you don't have to ride a delivery bike around New York anymore. Of course, the number of gang members here pales in comparison to the number of law-abiding, legitimate asylum seekers. However, as we're learning, it only takes a small number of bad actors to have a major negative impact on a system that's designed to help people. You've only got a few gang members in these shelters, yet many of them are places where asylum seekers say they do not feel safe. The other issue to consider here is that many asylum seekers, they weren't doing delivery jobs where they're from. You have people that had very different jobs, and many of them very well may have skills that allow them to succeed and provide for themselves in America, but maybe just not in America's most expensive city that has a highly specialized, service-based, internet-connected economy. A lot of the jobs that you're going to need require a high level of computer proficiency, maybe an advanced college degree to afford the rents in some of these overpriced apartments, which could mean that even though New Yorkers are incredibly generous, that this just might not be the best place place for an asylum crisis to take place. At the exact same time, if we do have thousands of jobs available and all of these employers that are ready to do some hiring, someone should probably tell them that they can start. But as we're finding out, the reality is those jobs were likely a myth. They either never existed or they existed and were eliminated. And now the city's faced with the reality that it has a large population of individuals who came here looking for a brighter future, are unable to find it, and are therefore dependent upon the city's humanitarian programs like shelter indefinitely. And to make matters worse, even though for years now we've been hearing about how work permits were the answer to New York's asylum crisis, and after we got people work permits, they would get their own jobs, well, now we're finding out that that too may be untrue, because this program that pays people to find an apartment and move out, it only applies to those who have the ability to get a job, meaning they have to have work permission. And if the only people will pay to leave are those who have